Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. My name's Alice and today's video is all about all of the books that I read in July. Welcome to my July wrap-up. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Alice and I like talking about books, especially all of the books that I have on my giant TBR of over 200 books. Today's video is all about books that I actually have read, and it's going to be my July wrap up. So I got quite a lot of books read in July. I've got 10 books on my pile here, and I also listened to 3 audiobooks for a total of 13 books read. Unfortunately, not every single one of these was off my giant TBR. I do have one reread in my stack here, and 2 books that I borrowed, and 3 of the books were audiobooks. So 7 books this month came off my giant TBR, which seems pretty good. This was the first month since I've been on BookTube where I've actually managed to read everything that was on my TBR, but I did finish one of the books and one of the audiobooks that I'm going to talk about today in August. But I had read 90% of both of those books in July, so I thought I would talk about them today anyway. First of all, it was Jane Austen July. You couldn't miss it. Jane Austen July was everywhere, and I loved this readathon. It's been my favourite readathon so far that I've participated in, which wasn't something I thought was going to happen to me. Prior to Jane Austen July, I had only read Northanger Abbey, which I read years ago, and Persuasion, which I read in April and loved, and I'm so glad I've finally come to Jane Austen's books. I had a great month, really enjoyed the Mansfield Park read along, and I also really enjoyed listening to Emma as an audiobook, which was my first time reading Emma as well. Let's start with my review of Jane Austen July. So first of all, for the read along, I read Mansfield Park. I did make a full vlog tracking my progress of reading Mansfield Park, so please do go and check that out. The whole readathon this month was hosted by Katie over at Books and Things, Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia at Spinster's Library. I will link all 3 of their channels down below if you want to go and check out some more excellent Jane Austen content. So it was my first Jane Austen July, and it was my first read along, and I really enjoyed reading Mansfield Park along with everybody else in the group on Goodreads. This was definitely one of my favourite books of the month, and I just loved this story. It was fantastic, and it made me want to go on to another Jane Austen straight away. So I listened to Emma on audiobook to meet prompt 1, which was read one of Jane Austen's 6 novels. Obviously I had already completed that by reading Mansfield Park, but I went ahead and listened to Emma anyway, and I absolutely loved Emma. I found it much more funny than any of the other Jane Austens that I've read so far. It's nowhere near as serious as Mansfield Park and Persuasion. I just found that there's so many comic characters in Emma. Emma herself I found very comic as heroines go. Plus I really enjoyed the fact that I had watched Clueless earlier in the month. I was really surprised when I was listening to Emma all the different things that film has picked out and transplanted into 90s America and high school, and it just works. I really think that Clueless is actually a very accurate adaptation of Emma, despite the fact that the whole setting has been completely changed. So that was very enjoyable to listen to it, knowing that I kind of knew the storyline from Clueless, and I enjoyed comparing the 2 as I went along, so that was really fun. I didn't manage to do prompt 2, prompt 3 or prompt 4, which was something by Jane Austen that's not one of her main novels, a non-fiction work about Jane Austen or her time, or a modern retelling of a Jane Austen book. I didn't manage any of those prompts this year, but I did read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen for prompt number 5, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This was another book that I really enjoyed. I would put Emma in my favourites of the month, but I would say Frankenstein's very close to being in my favourites of the month as well. This is a really excellent read. I didn't realise how terrible a father figure Frankenstein is to his monster, who he basically just abandons. It is Victor Frankenstein that is the cause of all the drama and grief in his own life and in other people's lives. I enjoyed my first reading of Frankenstein. As classics go, it was a fairly easy one to get through. It was different to how I expected it. It's sort of a story within a story within a story, but I found that style of writing very interesting. And yes, I really enjoyed reading Frankenstein this month. This one came off my giant TBR. I'm really glad that Jane Austen July prompted me to read it. I also failed in prompt number 6. I had every intention of watching a direct adaptation, but unfortunately Netflix removed both versions of Pride and Prejudice that I was planning to watch during July before I was ready to watch them. However, now I've read Emma, I am planning to try and watch the 2020 adaptation of Emma, and my mum is also going to lend me a DVD of, I think it might be 2009 Emma. It was a BBC miniseries one, which looks really good, so I will watch that probably in August. And prompt 7 was a modern screen adaptation. As I've said, I watched Clueless. I love Clueless, and having listened to Emma, I now absolutely can't believe how similar they both are despite their differences. I think both Cher and Emma are really lovable, misguided characters. I definitely want to do Jane Austen July again, and I'm hoping that next year I will be able to complete all of the prompts. I now only have 2 Jane Austens left to read, Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, so I will be looking to read those soon, I hope, and if not, I will have them left to read next year in Jane Austen July. So that was Jane Austen July, and I really enjoyed that part of the month. Alongside Jane Austen July, I've been reading lots of summer reads that I selected for my July TBR. I've already talked about some of them in my mid-month mini wrap-up, so I won't go into all of them here. The next thing I wanted to update you on is my progress on Don Quixote, which I've been reading since June. I didn't make any progress on this month. I've been too busy with the classics of Jane Austen to read another classic, so unfortunately Don Quixote, no more pages were read of it in July, but I will be going back to try and finish this off, or at least make some good progress on it in August. Okay, next up, very quickly, because these ones I talked about in my other wrap-up, I read 3 of the Series of Unfortunate Events book. 2 of these were from my TBR and 1 I borrowed. I read book 6, 7 and 8, and I really loved these. I would either put these on my favourites of the month or in my good category. Really enjoyed reading these books. I also really enjoyed my latest Jack Reacher book that I've read, but I've already talked about this elsewhere too, just to say that I would put this in my good category for the month as well. Really enjoyed reading that. Next up, I mentioned this book in my mid-month wrap-up. It's Her Fearful Symmetry by Audrey Niffeneger. Now, for this book, unfortunately, I'm going to have to put this book into a new category, which is a category called Didn't Enjoy. Didn't enjoy this book at all. When I last spoke to you, I was hoping that the final third of this book was going to be a really good payoff for what had been building up, but I didn't like the ending to this at all. In fact, the ending was actually worse than the build-up. The characters in this are pretty horrible. They do nasty things. They're not good people, but not in a really good way, because I quite like books about not good people sometimes. No spoilers, but I think the big twist in this, the author probably thought it was a better twist than it was, because by the time I got to that, I actually wasn't interested anymore. The only positive thing I can think of to say about Her Fearful Symmetry, there was one decent character in this book whose name was Martin, and he was suffering really badly from obsessive compulsive disorder and couldn't leave his apartment. I think I really related to Martin and I liked his storyline, and it was the only positive point in otherwise a book that was just not for me at all. And I'm really sad to say that, because this is by an author whose other book that I've read, The Time Traveller's Wife, I absolutely love and would say it's in my top 10 books of all time. This one is probably in my bottom 10 books of all time. Not for me at all. I didn't read any books this month that I only thought were okay, so I'll go on to the good category. I would put Frankenstein into the good category. I would put the 2 other audiobooks that I read apart from Emma into this category. They were Right Ho Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse and Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I've been listening to Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo, but I've still got about 8 hours left on that one. That will be probably in the August wrap-up. The next book that would be in my good category was Peril at End House. This was a reread. of a Poirot novel. The only thing stopping this from being in my favourites of the month category is 1, it was a reread, and 2, it's not one of my top favourite Poirots of all time. I actually thought that I liked this even more, like I had really fond memories of this one, but when I started reading it I actually had no recollection of any of the characters. I had the vaguest recollection of like the opening of this book, and then I had no knowledge of the rest of the plot, which was great because I was able to read it not knowing who done it because I'd forgotten it all over the last 10 years or so. Yeah, I read this for Christie Fest, which is run by Hungry Bookworm. I would say most other people in the group that I read this with enjoyed it more than I did. Yeah, I mean, it is a great Poirot book. It's just not one of my top favourites. It does have a good resolution, and I would recommend this if you are enjoying Hercule Poirot books and you'd like to read one that's maybe a little bit different. Try Peril at End House. Also in my good category I would put the book Let the Right One In by John Ajvide Lindqvist. I not only read this book but I watched the film adaptation Let Me In, and I also plan to watch the original film adaptation of it. This is translated from the Swedish, and the original film of this was called Let the Right One In and was a Swedish film, which apparently the American remakes quite faithfully, so I'm not really sure why they've made a remake of it at all. So I do plan to watch that one as well to compare the two. If you'd be interested in seeing a comparison of all three, I'd be happy to make that video, so let me know in the comments below. This is nothing like anything else I read this month. This is about a little boy who's an outsider at school and a girl he meets outside his apartment who is in fact a vampire. What unfolds is a very strange and interesting relationship. This book is quite big, but it gripped me. I had planned to try and read 100 pages a day and get through the 500 pages in the last week of July, but I actually read it in 2 days. So it is a good book. It's very page turning. It's very, very horrible in places, and the film was definitely a very cleaned up and slightly censored version of this. This leaves in all the horror, all the gore, and has some quite unsettling parts to the storyline. It also follows quite a lot more people than the film did. I did feel that if anything, this book possibly could have told us a little bit less about some of those characters and been slightly shorter, but that was probably my only complaint about it. Other than that, some parts were just a little bit too horrible for my tastes, but I did enjoy this book. It was very different. I often struggle with translated fiction because I find it hard to get into translations sometimes. I think I pick up too hard on the fact that the language doesn't quite ring true sometimes, and I did find this in probably the first quarter of the book, but I soon got into it and got past that. It's a very readable book. I would recommend checking it out if you like horror, but it's definitely not a book for the faint-hearted. So the final books I wanted to mention this month are the ones that are my favourites of the month, and we've already talked about Mansfield Park and Emma, which were both definitely favourites of this month. But I do have one more book to talk about, and I actually finished this technically on the 1st of August. As I've finished it, I am going to talk about it today, and that was Ring the Hill by Tom Cox. I've been wanting to read this book for a really long time. I've mentioned in previous videos that I really love Tom Cox's books and have read his 4 books about cats, which are really, really funny. I've read his other nature book, which is called 21st Century Yokel. And also this year I read his book of short stories called Help the Witch. So this is the second non-fiction, sort of loosely about nature book that Tom Cox has written, and I probably enjoyed it as much as 21st Century Yokel, if not probably more. I got very excited when I got to a chapter where Tom Cox moved into the house where he clearly wrote the title story of Help the Witch. And he talks about how spooky it was. From having read both of those books this year, I was just overjoyed to see how it fitted together. So to see his non-fiction account of what he fictionalised in Help the Witch, which is a brilliant story. So that was really fun and enjoyable. The final chapter is really, really sad because he writes about 2 of his old cats whose lives I had followed in his 4 cat books. And sadly, during the writing of this book, 2 of his beloved cats died and they were very old. That made me cry. That was a really sad chapter. But Tom Cox's writing is always really engaging and really interesting. He brings aspects of folklore into it. He tells you about the history of different places, but in a really interesting way, mixed in with sort of his observations. His love of animals and nature absolutely comes across in every page. He has a very funny dad who shouts a lot, and he has a very talented mum who has made beautiful lino prints for each chapter in this book. This was my favourite. This is of his 2 cats, Shipley and the bear, but really, really beautiful lino prints in all the different chapters. And it also has very beautiful end papers with hares. Ring the Hill itself is apparently a nickname for a hare, so I didn't know that before reading this. I love the way he discusses the different places that he's lived and compares them. These are really brilliant books, and I would highly recommend Tom Cox. I now have 1 book of his left to read, which is called Notebook, hoping that will be just as interesting and good. So that was my 13 books that I read in July. All that remains is for me to give you an update, a check-in with the giant TBR. So at the end of June, I had a total of 225 books. This month I managed to read 7 of those 225 books in total, so my new total at the moment stands at 218 books. So I'm hoping to make a dent in that in August, because I don't plan on borrowing very many books, although I will definitely still be listening to audiobooks. Thanks for watching my wrap up of everything that I read in July. I hope you enjoyed it and will give it a like if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already. I talk about books on a very regular basis here on BookTube. I've absolutely loved Jane Austen July and participating in it for the very first time, and I think I am a complete Jane Austen convert now. Please do drop me a comment and let me know what was your favourite book that you read in July. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll all join me again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.